I have a really cool video for you guys today. This one is called How to Beat Matthew Decks. And, and this is a question I've thought a lot about because Matthew decks are arguably the best decks in Redemption right now, at least in Type 1. And for those who don't know, like Matthew is this character, this disciple that can come out on turn 1 attack. And when he converts to Meek, you get to draw a bunch of cards. There's a little bit of variance there depending upon how many brigades are in your opponent's hands, but this can easily draw you anywhere between 3 to 10 cards when you attack with him. So, and when you're just drawing that many cards, you're just becoming so far ahead on resources, and you have all the tools you need to get the right attacks going and the right blocks going. So drawing cards is one of the most powerful things you can be doing in Redemption. And Matthew decks, consistently do that almost every game. So right now I pulled up a deck that was posted in the Redemption Discord. This was a deck posted by Gabe. And to me, this encapsulates what disciples are trying to do. In my mind, is a pretty stock list. And when I'm kind of talking about disciples, decks like these that I'm referring to, decks with play a lot of heroes on the offense, a smaller defensive package, and they're trying to get to Matthew on turn 1 and snowball the game from there. So we're gonna play a little goldfish game, just kind of demonstrate what the Matthew deck does, and then I'll talk about some strategies that you can employ to actually beat these disciple decks, because they're not invincible. They do have weaknesses, and hopefully I'll be able to equip some people with knowledge and tools that they can use if they're getting frustrated fighting against Matthew decks. All right, so I'm going to start up a new game here, and I'm just going to goldfish as Matthew, just so you can, for those who don't know about what Matthew decks are really capable of. All right, so for this playtest game, we're going to assume that we're going to go first. And Matthew decks have a lot of really consistent ways to get to Matthew, but sometimes you just have them in your opening hand. So let's skip the darkness. Oh, let's get the darkness going. Let's grab an evil character to thin our deck. We don't want to draw this. We'd rather fetch this out. And then for our turn, we can go Simon Peter, convert to Meek to play a fort from the deck. Let's get our Herod's Temple out randomly, I guess. Help our defense. Help our outsiders. We'll band Matthew. I have the option to convert him to Meek or reveal dominant. I'll just convert him to Meek for this example. And let's say he looks at the opponent's hand and there are 7 different brigades in their hand, which is not uncommon. So I get to draw 7 cards. And this number will vary between decks and games, but I don't really have a good way to figure out whether the average number of cards Matthew will draw against the unknown deck. So let's just assume he draws 7 for this example. And this is why Matthew is so powerful. If they block and they have something that puts them in a special initiative, they can go the Ascension, band any number into heroes. So we're doing this, doing this, doing this. And you can see how the snowball is going to continue to go. So we'll exchange this with a martyr from our deck. Let's see, martyr, Polycarp's martyr, I guess. All right, Polycarp's in play. Matthias can convert to Meek to bounce somebody, so they can bounce their blocker and reveal up to X cards. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's top 4. And I get to take one of these. Let's grab Herod the Great and Underdeck. And then John goes. He can reveal this to toss the next and draw 2 cards. And yeah, opponent's probably not going to win that battle. So I'll put these guys back in territory. Discard that. Now, let's get ready. Go down to hand size for next turn. Have a great setup. Oh yeah, and I forgot to put Ends of the Earth into battle. That could have looked at the top 7 and got something. And so after that huge attack, we still have 8 cards in hand. I got to put down one more thing. Let's see, did we do a territory class? No, we can go Spirit as a Dove, get something out of our deck. Let's do Akeem, like to start negating. Oh wait, has to get a New Testament card, so that's an Old Testament card. Even though it says Matthew, he's technically Old Testament. Let's see, what's a card that we think we're gonna want? Maybe let's get some hand protection going. So you can imagine if you were going second against this deck and they had a start like that and they were able to play their Ascension, they're like super ahead. They got all these heroes out, they got this, they still have a full grip, full of great defensive options. Deceiver, Herod the Great, even outsiders, but outsiders probably not going to be that good on the draw. And so let's say it's turn 2. Let's just bear with me now, but the deck is going to continue to snowball. Draw 3 cards. Here's what we can do. We can activate Temple Veil, bounce. We can bounce either Matthias or Matthew or somebody or Peter. So bounce Matthew, and these 4 drachma coin. Activate this on Peter. Discard this to draw 4 cards. And then activate Book of the Covenant. We can go get a Covenant from our reserve. Let's go get I don't know, send the helper. We can play a territory class card for turn. We can get the good seed down, make our attacks even better. Now we can attack it all over again with Matthew. Oh wait, yeah, we can bounce a clay hero. Let's bounce this guy. Now what I'm really looking for here is the resurrection. We can just get massive banding going on. But it will suffice with attacking with Matthew again, converting to Meek, maybe drawing like 4 cards or whatever. I don't know. Drawing up to hand size basically. And it has some really strong enhancements options to either kill people regardless of protection, add people to battle, like add Lazarus to battle, negate, draw, add Matthias to battle, to bounce. It's a lot of great offensive options here. But what I'm trying to say is like maybe on turn 2, if things are going right for the Disciples deck, they can get down to like 10 or 12 or 13 cards left in their deck by turn 2. And maybe it's turn 2 and you have 40 cards left in your deck and you're like, okay, there's just no way I'm coming back from this much this much stuff, right? So that's just a high level kind of idea about what disciple decks are capable of and how they can just take an early advantage with some cards and like run away with the game. And on paper, it looks pretty unstoppable. So how do you go about beating stuff like this? That's the question on everybody's mind, right? Well, there's a couple different ways. One I will call the preventative approach, where the idea is we got to try and stop Matthew before he draws cards. That's what I'll call the preventative approach. So you have cards like Holy of Holies. So imagine if maybe you're going first, you get your Holy of Holies out, and then when Matthew tries to attack you, his ability is going to be prevented. So yeah, there's that. Or let's say you have cards like Bethlehem Stable or Storehouse that protect your hand. Matthew attacks you. Part of the thing that he has to do in order to draw all those cards is revealing your hand. And if your hand's protected, he can't draw cards. So you have cards like Storehouse, Bethlehem Stable, and this Crowd's Lost Soul, which also gives you protection. You also have Stricken, which is a star ability that protects all decks and reserves from opponents during the next battle phase. So you reveal this from your opening hand, and they're going first. If they attack with Matthew, their deck is going to be protected from them, so they cannot draw cards from their deck if the Stricken effect is happening. And you have a card like Salty that says, well, no evil characters in battle prevent enhancements. And so if Matthew players are trying to use territory class enhancements to set up and get Matthew out of their deck, this is going to toss those away or prevent them. But I don't know, if you're playing Salty, like don't expect that to stop Matthew. They're only usually playing one setup card, Spirit as a Dove, that can get Matthew out of the deck. But all right, so what's the problem with the preventative approach? Well, you can only go first 50% of the time. So 50% of the time, your approach isn't going to do anything against Matthew decks. I will give some caveats. Yeah, Stricken, you have to have this in your opening hand. But what percent of games are you going to have this in your opening hand? You know, it's your strategy against Matthew is only going to work that percent of time. Or what percent of time are you going to draw your Crowd's Lost Soul? And even if you get your protection down, even if you get your Holy of Holies down, there's no guarantee that protection will be valid when Matthew attacks. What do I mean by that? Matthew players have a lot of tools to deal with this, namely Three Woes. They can use Three Woes to negate your protection. They can use Son of God to negate Crowd's Lost Soul. They can use, I guess they can use Three Woes to negate Holy of Holies too. So there's like, even if you have the turn 1 where you get your Matthew answer into play, there's no guarantee that play is going to protect you against what's coming. And oh yeah, even against Stricken, if they manage to get their own protection down, they're now protected from your protection, so they can draw cards again. So yeah, that's what I'm calling the preventative approach. And sure, it can help you sometimes, but I'm not suggesting as if you want to beat Matthew, then use the preventative approach. I'm rather going to tell you something a little bit different than that. One last thing I'll say about the preventative approach, you can also build your deck in a way where the amount of brigades in your deck is small. What do I mean by that? Let's say you're playing an offense. Instead of playing 4, 5, 6 different colors across all your different cards, maybe stick to try and playing one. And you're same with your defense. And so when Matthew attacks you, the maximum number of cards they could possibly draw are 2. Now that is going to help your Matthew matchup, but it's probably going to hurt your other matchups across the board, because when you're making that sacrifice of only playing cards that only have 1 or 2 brigades on them, you're making your deck weaker. The cards that have 1 or 2 brigades on them aren't usually as strong as the ones that have 3 or 4. So even that approach is like, it's sure you're helping your Matthew matchup, but you're making out your deck weaker and less powerful as a result. So Now, there's probably somebody out there who's cracked it and has found a really good deck that plays low number of brigades, and that'd be good for them. But for the rest of us who want to play whatever we want to do, we got to figure out different ways to fight the Matthew deck. So I'm calling this technique is the Aikido defense technique. Aikido is a martial arts form where the idea is you're trying to leverage the aggressiveness of your attacker against your attacker. So for example, somebody's coming at you with the giant swing, you're just going to use his forward momentum and kind of dance around them using all their aggressiveness and just doing simple movements to to keep them off balance and make them fall down and just eat it. And so here's a list of cards that are kind of take advantage of Matthew's aggressiveness with drawing a bunch of cards and kind of use it against them. So let's go back to our theoretical scenario here, where the Matthew opponent is always drawing a bunch of cards, and they're always trying to maintain this precarious hand of 8 cards here. In order to do that, look at what they have to do. They have to put down all their characters from their hands. I know they're not always going to play all the characters out of their hands. Sometimes they're going to use Son of God, Second Coming. Those take up cards in their hand. They're going to play those, get some Lost Souls. But if you can find cards that kind of leverage their overextension, so to say, you can kind of sneak some wins against Matthew. Let me restructure this battlefield for a bit to make room for some other players. Anyways, I don't know, something like that. So notice from the Disciples player perspective, like maybe they play down a lot of their characters into their territory because they're trying to keep out a hand size limit. They would be super weak to attack from John the Forerunner. He is the type of effect that really punishes people for playing down all their characters to their territory. Let's say there was a Three Woes or a shipwreck that got rid of their Herod's temple, and nobody in their territory was protected. John could just come in, theoretically speaking, and paralyze all their defense and just walk in for the souls. So it doesn't matter how many evil cards, evil enhancements they have in their hand. If they're just getting attacked with John, it's like one card is basically like neutralizing 5 or 6 different evil characters. Or on the defensive side of things, you have cards like Romans Destroy Jerusalem. These are also cards that can punish people who are playing down a lot of their heroes from their deck. So if you have a Roman and you happen to get this card out of your reserve, or you just have it in your hand, playing this against an opponent who doesn't have any territory protection is going to cost them a lot of things. So in theory, you could just boom, and now they go like that, and what are they left with to finish the job? Some of these angels, a Joanna, it's just like Simon. If you manage to really, somebody doesn't expect it, you can manage to really blow people out with cards that attack the territory. That's what I'm trying to say. So number one is try to leverage their board advantage against them. Cards like Romans Destroy Jerusalem, John the Forerunner, Outsiders. It doesn't have to be like mass board wipes or anything. You can even use cards like Mary to just snipe off their best characters and get your best attacks in like that. So that's kind of one category of cards I'll put up here. So let's say from a theoretical standpoint again, you're the Disciple player, you drew a bunch of cards, and in order to get your hand size down to 8, you had to play your Son of God. And so maybe you're ahead on Lost Souls. You're up on Souls. You attacked, you got the Lost Soul. Now you're up 2-0. Another card that helps decks catch up is a card called Grapes of Wrath. Grapes of Wrath, this basically restarts the battle, and if you're behind on Lost Souls, or if it's a tie, you can make a new rescue attempt. So if opponent played the Ascension turn and have banded all their heroes into battle, and they're confident that they're going to get the Lost Soul, it's like, what's the opponent going to do? Or tossing the next. Grapes of Wrath can just come in out of nowhere, discard the evil character that's blocking, and shuffle them, put them really far behind, put all those heroes that are in battle back into their deck, and they're going to be left basically just stonewalled by one card. So that's another way of leveraging their opponent's early aggressiveness, trying to get ahead, having to play their Son of God to get down to hand size, using Grapes of Wrath. Or even if you're playing a Grapes of Wrath deck and your offense is losing, you can use Grapes of Wrath to reset your attack and get another attack in if you're behind. So that can really matter. Another way to kind of attack these Matthew decks is, okay, sure, they're going to draw all those cards, but if you're able to prevent them from playing their enhancements in battle, those enhancements are just going to sit there in their hand, rotting away. They're going to have to play down their evil characters, and that's going to make your strategy, like maybe if you're using John or Mary, that much more potent. Basically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to clog up their hand, make a lot of their enhancements kind of not really do anything. So you have cards like Colosseum, If the opponent tries to play these cards, they're just going to get tossed across. Not only is it clogging up their hand, making sure their dominants are staying in their hand, they're drawing a bunch of dominants from their deck, and they don't want to discard their dominants. It also tosses enhancements with the word negated in them. And the Disciples deck plays a lot of that. You have Authority of Christ, you have the Ascension, you have Spirit as a Dove. These are cards that all Disciples decks are probably going to be playing, and if you're tossing them, imagine them just sitting, with their hand, just sitting with 3 really good enhancements, but they can't really do anything with them. Another way to make sure their dominants are staying in their hand is a card like Peter's Curse, which restricts good dominance for 3 turns. And so that could be super annoying for the opponent. If they're drawing all these cards, they have to get down to 8 at the end of turn, and they can't play their dominance. So you're going to have to play down the heroes, play down the evil characters, discard cards. It just puts them in a not great scenario. And what's the point of drawing through all your deck if you have to discard maybe 2 or 3 cards at the end of your turn because you can't really use them or leverage them in a good way? So if you kind of pair maybe enhancement restriction, maybe using on your blocks, playing Glory of the Lord so they can't play any enhancements that they want to play, combining that with Peter's Curse, that is a good way to keep their hand size at 8, make them make difficult decisions on their discard step. Another way to kind of shut down Disciples is they rely heavily on their reserve. Cards like Book of the Covenant, Sin the Helper, Good Seed, they're all going to the reserve. They're getting out their best cards. Some Disciples players play Simon in their reserve, and some play in the main deck, but if you're able to shut down getting to Simon, that's huge. If you're able to shut down getting to Eternal Inheritance, that's also huge. Getting to shut down their access to Sin the Helper if they're using Book of the Covenant, or You Will Remain, or anything like that. If you kind of shut this out of their deck, you are going to have a much easier time stalling out their offense. Sure, their turn 1 and maybe turn 2 are going to be good, but turn 3, turn 4, turn 5, their attacks are going to start to look real weak if they don't have these cards. So another card that does this is Herodias. You have to be playing Herods, though. She just kind of sits in your territory, and if you have another Herod in play, you can prevent people from getting into the reserve. And even if their reserve is protected by Bethlehem Stable or something, this restriction will prevent the opponent from actually getting into the reserve, even if they have protection. Another card that I didn't really put here, and I forgot to put this in the list of Preventative Approach cards, but if you can get an early Nazareth down, that will stop them from searching their mouth. But if you put this down later turns, this can also prevent them from getting into the reserve too. So I just wanted to mention that. So we'll put that in a new category of cards. Restrict access to their reserve. There's not a lot of cards that do that, so Herodias, Nazareth. Another way to attack Disciples is negating their neutral cards. They're very dependent upon cards like Book of the Covenant, like we had said earlier, Temple Veil to bounce their heroes, Send the Helper to bounce their heroes, or Drachma Coin to draw a bunch of cards, Ends of the Earth to get more cards and negate neutrals. And so if you're able to have a single card in play like Akeem or Resurrection Revealer, you can have your territory class character do a bunch of work by negating their neutral cards. So kind of the same concept as I was talking about with the reserve. If you're playing against Disciples and you kind of neutralize these cards, you're going to have an easier time beating them. And imagine pairing territory class negates with reserve restriction, or pairing territory class negates with, one of the other strategies I mentioned earlier. Basically, I'm trying to help people see that there's a lot of ways you can mix and match and make your deck good against Disciples, or have a better matchup against Disciples. And so, for example, right now, if you're able to play a deck that has territory class plus restricting reserve, getting rid of a big kind of chunk of their offensive firepower is going to help you out a lot in the long run. And even if an opponent finds a way maybe to remove your Herodias or remove this, you have redundancy. So if they get rid of one, they still have to go through the other. So if you're able to stop the Disciples from bouncing their heroes, I think they do that with Temple Veil, Send the Helper, and Lost Child Found. But basically, they have a bunch of ways to do it with their artifacts. And so if you can stop them from resetting their Lazarus, and some people played Matthias, but re-stopping them from bouncing Matthew and attacking with Matthew, that's really good. And Negate Neutrals does that. You know what also is very good against an opponent who's very over-leveraged? There's not very many of these effects in Redemption, but they're there. They are board resets. So a good example of a board reset is 3 Nails. If you have Unity, Heroes Meek, and if the opponent has board advantage, you can banish this card to shuffle all cards in play, set aside arrows and hands, regardless of protection. And each player gets to draw 8 cards. Cannot be negated. And so you can imagine if opponent goes first and they have this mega bonkers turn, first turn, turn 1, you can just activate 3 nails on your turn, assuming you have a meek hero, and you can really undo all the hard work that they've done. Hopefully they'll have burned a lot of setup cards, a lot of dominance, trying to do that. And by doing this, not only can you give both boards parity again, like you don't have to deal with all these evil characters and all these heroes at the same time, you'll also kind of get rid of all the setup they have in their hand and force them to do it again. And so if you pair 3 nails with another strategy, like I mentioned before, you're going to do well. Or a new beginning, if you're playing the Flood Survivor deck, it kind of does the same thing as 3 nails, but it's a dominant kind of a reset. So I'll put that over here as a board reset. Great way to come back from a big hole that disciples can put you in. They went and drew all those cards, but for what? Just to get their entire board reset. So undoes a lot of, it's like the magic erase button. Another type of card, or should I say strategy, that is good against disciples is a strategy called Soul Hide, which involves playing Meek Lost Souls and then using cards like Annis the Elder or Burial to underdeck those cards, those Meek Lost Souls from your Land of Bondage, and prevent the opponent from rescuing them. So if you can imagine a scenario where the opponent has all their stuff in play, but you're managed off to get a good block with Annis and underdeck 2 Meek Lost Souls, all of a sudden the opponent's going to have all these cards in play, but nothing to do with them. Like if they attack, sure, they can draw all the cards, but all the cards in the world aren't going to help them against the lack of lost souls in the Land of Bondage. So that their Son of God are going to be sitting in their hand. All these enhancements are going to be sitting in their hand. And a simple strategy can just neutralize a lot of the deck. And Burial's really good at doing that too. But there is a slight weakness to this. The printing of the Lost Souls card has made this strategy a little bit harder to pull off because this rewards the Disciples player for drawing cards. And so if they draw any Lost Soul, Old Testament Lost Soul, put it in their Land of Bondage, they can create a Lost Soul token in your Land of Bondage. So let's say like, haha, I hide all the souls. What are you going to do? I'm going to attack. I'm going to draw some cards, generate some Lost Souls, put them in your territory. And now all of a sudden you have to contend with the might, the Disciples army. But I'll just put that as an honorable mention, as a good strategy, historically speaking. All right, another category of cards that are typically pretty good against Disciples are these chump block cards. Cards that, even though the opponent has amassed a large amount of resource advantage, these cards can do a lot for very little. Emperor Otho requires you have to sacrifice a New Testament great card from your hand, but he can discard all cards in battle. And if you pair this with a card like Herod's Temple, where you can toss before you block, this card will not only strand the opponent's enhancements in their hand, it'll prevent them from getting Lost Souls, so really strong. Or if they're attacking with all their heroes, you can just block with Uzzah. If you're playing OT Lost Souls, protect them from rescue. If you're playing Unity Brown, or Firefoxes that can also protect Lost Souls from opponents. So these are examples of things I call chump blocks, where you have like one evil character, they're pretty expendable, they're just trying to get maybe one block off and not allowing the opponent to get initiative in battle, because disciples will take advantage of that. They'll use their negate, draw cards, interrupt the battle, and they will wreck you. Another point of strategy is play answers to Simon the Zealous. This card is incredibly strong. Disciples players love to play this card and pair it with cards like Falling Away, where they can just choose your hero to become an evil character, then choose it to block and play Authority of Christ to kill everybody. Simon really sets up really good attacks for the opponent. So if you have good ways to figure out how to beat Simon, then you're going to do better against Disciples decks. So some of those ways are add to battle dominance. Let's say the opponent like, haha, I'll choose your hero to be an evil character, and then I will play Authority of Christ to destroy everybody. Then you still have a chance to play a dominant, so you can play Murderous Command, get an Egyptian out of your deck, and block with the Egyptian or Overtaken to do the same thing. And all of a sudden, they used all their resources, and now they're left with a 3-2 in battle. So it's not a guaranteed block, but at least it helps you get out of those sneaky choose the blocker attacks that disciples are capable of. Another way to fight Simon is giving your guys in your territory protection. So if you're playing a New Testament defense, maybe you can craft your defense in a way where all your evil characters are gospel humans. So if you have a Herod's Temple out and they try to attack you with Simon, this is just going to protect your entire territory from getting chosen. So not only does this protect your defense, it also protects your offense from falling away. If you're playing an entirely gospel-centered offense, you have Herod's Temple, this is also not an option where they can want to falling away your hero that's in your territory. and then go with Simon. If you haven't picked up by now, Heritage Temple does a lot of different things against the Disciples deck. It provides answers against Simon, helps stop Disciples players from playing their enhancements. All right, for those who saw Chamber of Angels in there, sorry, I don't know why I included that. But anyways, yeah, play Territory Protection, play Add to Battles. Think about having answers to Simon plus Falling Away. That'll help you avoid giving up a free lost soul. So we're going to put those over there. I'm going to put this as an honorable mention, but if you can prevent the opponent from it kind of leveraging all their resources, that's going to help you in the Disciples matchup. So Pot of Mana is great at making it only so that one character can be in battle at a time. So it can neutralize the fact that they drew all these cards and they drew their heroes, but they can't band them into battle and get an even bigger snowball going. So that's why I believe cards or decks like the Honeypot deck have a good matchup against Disciples, because they're pairing Holy of Holies plus Pot of Mana. So not only are they shutting down Matthew turn 1, but they're restricting the ability to keep snowballing for in later turns with Pot of Mana too. So honorable mention there. And if you thought I was going to leave out Herdsmen of Gerar, you're going to be severely disappointed, because this card has been the traditional answer to Matthew decks. But this video was called How to Win Against Matthew Decks, and I believe Herdsman only answers the question, how do I not lose against Matthew decks? Because if Matthew attacks you and they draw 10 cards, and you block with Herdsman and you draw 10 cards, you didn't, like, what you did there, you didn't win the game. You're only stopping yourself from not losing. The 10 cards are keeping you in the game. So I don't believe Herdsman kind of fits into the picture of, oh, how do I beat Disciples deck? Let's just play Herdsman and call it a day, you know? I feel like you have to pair, or Herdsman definitely helps against the Disciples, don't get me wrong. But I feel like you have to pair Herdsman with some of these strategies that I've mentioned earlier in order to really be effective in beating Disciples. And I would say if Herdsman really beat Disciples, like, why are Disciples still kind of top dog, even though everyone's running Herdsman? Part of that kind of goes back to what I was saying, is like, Herdsman isn't helping you beat Disciples, it's just helping you not lose on the spot right there. But the Disciples, if they get ahead in cards, they have really good tools to just get those auto blocks that doesn't matter how many cards you've drawn, basically. And also another reason is Disciples are adapting, and they are going to be running Accusers. They should be, at least in my opinion. And so if the Disciples player has an Accusers in play, you can't really block with Herdsman, unless you have a Humble out or a Son of God, they're Accusers. But anyways, if everyone's running Herdsman as their answer to Disciples, I feel like somebody at Nationals is going to come in with Disciples deck running Accusers, and it's going to run over everybody. But anyway, there's the video. Hope you have some ideas now on how you might be able to tweak your deck in such a way to have a better Disciples matchup. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.